Hello there, and welcome to Sync Music Matters, a podcast that explores the beautiful relationship between music and the moving image. My name is Jim Hustrip, and I'm your host on this journey, as each week I seek to understand the people and the process behind the best music in TV, film and games. I'm talking to composers, but I'm also talking to editors, music supervisors, directors, and anyone else who's involved with the synchronous process of pairing audio and visuals. Hello, listener. In a moment, I'm going to be chatting to composers Aaron May and David Ridley, who recently scored the much-talked-about Netflix drama Adolescence. We talk about the power of collaboration, which Dave reckons is a superpower, and I'm inclined to agree. We also talk about their route into composing, creating a sound palette or sonic language for each individual project, the Dunning-Kruger effect, working in prisons, and some of the illicit parkour-esque activities that they got up to as students. But before we do, I have a quick favour to ask. If you could take 5 seconds just to rate and review this podcast on your preferred podcast platform, I'd be really grateful. It just helps tell the algorithm that this podcast is worth listening to and helps it reach as many people as possible. So thank you. Anyway, let's crack on. Aaron and David are the progressive composer duo responsible for scoring Netflix's recent psychological crime drama, Adolescence. Other credits include ITVs Malpractice and the 4 times BAFTA-nominated feature Boiling Point. Aaron and David met at Bristol Uni, where they were doing a Masters in Composition. They played in bands together before collaboratively scoring their first short in 2017. Since then, they've gone on to create bold, distinctive soundtracks, blending contemporary classical and electronic elements. Their working practice puts an emphasis on experimentation and conversation, both with each other and their co-creatives, in order to harness the true power of collaboration. Aaron, David, thanks for joining me.
Hi there. It's nice to join you as well, Jim.
Right, so same question as I always start with. Aaron, we'll go with you first. If you were to cast your mind back to growing up on the mean streets of Sawston, if someone had asked you what you wanted to be when you grew up, what would you have replied?
It depends on the age. If I was under 10, it would have been a fireman. Then I think probably from the ages of 10 to 12, probably in the SAS. And then, yeah, for a short amount of time in the SAS, and then probably from 12 to 13 or 12 to 14, professional rollerblader, and then from 15 onwards,
which is still a pipe dream.
Which is still a pipe dream, and then from 15 onwards, 15 to sort of 18 in a band, then probably from 18 to 24 or 18 to 22, a Aphex Twin-esque producer. And then from 22 onwards, a film composer. So there's my history of what I wanted to be when I was older.
An eclectic blend, and obviously it seems like a very natural progression from SAS to rollerblader.
Because the SAS guys go around and roll. That's how they move so quietly, isn't it?
Well, I mean, what's interesting, aside from sort of all the earlier iterations, you sort of then got to a point where, obviously, Aphex Twin, and we'll kind of touch on that later when we kind of chat about your influences, but you obviously heard something there that inspired you musically.
Yeah, I think that probably first getting into more electronic music when I was in my sort of late teens or mid to late teens was a bit of a thing in discovering sound or timbre as a as an interesting variation or like creative variation of music alongside kind of harmony and melody and rhythm. It was definitely quite a big moment, I guess, in my musical like development and just how I saw sound and music.
So focusing on sound more and like the choice of sound rather than just sort of the classic sort of like lineup of a band, but now you're going to sound like an electronic like manipulation of sound.
Yeah, and I think there's definitely something because I would say I'm less interested in that now than I was a few years ago, like 5 or 6 years ago. But I think there's like a time when you're younger and you first get into something like that, and it goes with anything creative and artistic. When you sort of like when you hear something for the first time or see something for the first time, and it all seems a little bit like alchemy, because you just don't know how any of it works. And then you get older and you learn more. You sort of learn the technique behind things, and it becomes a bit more kind of open, and you can hear things and know what people have done. But there's this like glorious moment where you're listening to so for example, listening to Aphex Twin for the first time, or for the first like few years, and just being like, this is complete magic. I don't know how he did any of this. My mind is completely blown.
So the question for you is like, now that you know how it's done, has that changed your relationship to how you hear it? Because obviously in the first instance, it's alchemy, it's magic, and it's like, oh my God, what is that? But now you know how to recreate it. Is that, because you mentioned as well that you're sort of less interested in that now, is that because, okay, well, I feel I've sort of ticked that off, I know how to do that, so I'm now looking for something else to get my teeth into?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, there's like a whole interesting sort of maybe deviation which is a bit convoluted, so maybe it's not good to go down, but I think there's like a whole interesting thing in creativity, which is creativity being a mix of ignorance and confidence. So when you're young and you're learning something, you maybe don't have the confidence of somebody who's older and knows how things work, because everything therefore has mystery. It then has an excitement, which you lose as you get older, but then you gain creativity, or as you get more experience, but then you gain creativity in other ways because you hear something and you know how it's done, and whether that's from a kind of like sound perspective, so kind of electronic perspective, or like a harmonic perspective, listening to something and knowing what they're doing harmonically, or any perspective, the like things have a magical quality when you don't know how things are done, and you'll look at the people who are doing it as these pinnacles of creativity, and then you learn it, and it becomes less magical, and you sort of add it to your toolbox, but then you to an extent want to you're always looking for that next thing that gives you that sort of excitement, because you've got no idea how whoever's doing it is doing it, and it's just amazing.
It's like magic.
I was going to say, it makes me think of magic, because that's where the magic circle, why they don't, a magician never reveals his secrets, because as soon as you tell someone how it's done, it ceases to be amazing. The whole the wonder of it is in that somebody has managed to create something and you just got no understanding of how they've done it. And I suppose exactly the same is true of music, or I suppose any other creative pursuit. But that's an interesting point, and I do love sort of delving into the depths of creativity, so we'll put a pin in it and maybe come back to it in a bit. But David, same question to you. As a youngster growing up on the mean streets of Ascot under Wychwood, what would you have replied to the question, what would you like to be when you grow up?
It's really funny. I really don't think I had a fixed idea at all. I was doing a lot of music as a kid, and quite a lot of sport as well, like quite a lot of like football and running and things, but I never really thought I would get older. I think I never thought I'd be an adult. Never really thought. I do remember at the age of about 13 getting pretty obsessed with like aviation though, and from about 13 to 16 I was very, very serious about becoming a helicopter pilot, which then morphed into being an astronaut, which actually was, I do remember telling someone that I wanted to be an astronaut when I was about 18. So I think it might have lasted for quite a long time. And I actually studied aerospace engineering for a year before dropping out and changing to music. And I think that was, I think if you'd have asked me then, like, do you want to be an astronaut? I'd been like, well, yeah, but doesn't everyone? Like, you're probably not going to be an astronaut. I think you need to have a background in being a fighter pilot and things. But I still am a little bit obsessed with aviation in a way, and just the magic of it. And
what was it that sparked that interest as a kid?
To be honest, I think it was my granddad. He would just sit out in the garden and with a pair of binoculars and just look at gliders. And you know what? This is a bit of a deep dive as well, but my great-granddad was responsible for building the first gliders with engines. Now, I know that sounds quite silly, but this is like just pre-Second World War. So my granddad grew up on airfields being like a sort of an errand boy and actually pushing these gliders around because you had to sort of lift up the wings. You still have to do that on gliders today. And he would just sit in the garden with binoculars, like looking at them all day. So it's probably to do with that, and just always always thinking about planes and helicopters, and still into it.
And so at what point, because obviously you studied aeronautical engineering, or started and then dropped out to do music, did you make a decision then, like, okay, I want to try and make a go of doing music professionally?
So alongside the whole aeronautical and like astronaut dream was a dream to also become a composer, and I think I was really split. And then I realised that was really the focus. And when I was about 19, I realised, well, I think growing up, you grow up with almost a godlike respect for the greats, the great sort of pantheon of composers. But there's always something in my head that says, oh, you just either have it or you don't. With composition in particular, at least for me, I always thought that, it's just almost like a God-given talent, and you can just do it. And then at the age of 18 or 19, I realised that's absolute bollocks. That's absolute rubbish, sorry. You need to practice it. You need to practice the art of creation as much as anything else, as much as the violin, as much as the piano, as much as like any like sport. You need to practice it, and you need to train at it, and you need to learn about it, about the art of it. And I think I didn't really realise that until I was quite late on in life. And I realised if I actually do want to be a composer, I can't just like do anything else. I need to spend years and years doing it and studying it. I think there is an element of sort of talent and aptitude for it, but the vast amount of it comes from just exposing yourself to the world and like absorbing like, instruction, as well as just being open and listening to loads and loads, and then just sort of growing as an artist in that regard. But yeah, it took me a long time to realise that, and that I think was to do with issues around humility, to be completely honest with you.
And Aaron, had it been something in your mind, is it when you had that sort of, let's say Aphex Twin was that catalyst for you discovering the alchemy of music? Did you then decide, okay, this is what I want to do?
It was definitely something that I had thought about for quite a long time. I think kind of alongside, I think probably around sixth form. So I think prior to, or maybe about year 11, I had always been like, I want to be in a band, sort of thing. But I think similarly to Dave, I think probably doing the GCSE, you had to do a bit of composition in GCSE music, and really, really enjoying that. And you had to write two bits of music. So I wrote a song. I was really into it at the time, actually. I was really into Radiohead. So I wrote a Radioheady sounding song, like every sort of like 16-year-old, like sort of like quite self-indulgent, emotional Radioheady sounding song. But then for the second composition, so they had Sibelius at the school, and we'd been listening to. We've been doing a bit in GCSE music on sort of the American minimalists, so like Steve Reich and Philip Glass, and which I think is quite a good way into realizing that like a more classical focused compositional language is possible, because you're using the tools that kind of you're using kind of harmonic tools and kind of like rhythmic tools that kind of that cross between classical music and popular music. So my second compositional piece was a like Philip Glassy kind of bit of minimalism, and I think I like came up with the initial sort of like thematic bit of material on the piano, but then just like built just being like, oh my god, you can just like put an arpeggio on top of this, and then you can put another one in like a slight different rhythm on top of this, and there's something particularly at that age where you're like, oh, and what I'm doing, I'm not like songwriting, I'm composing, like, which is but because it's again, because it was minimalism, like could do it with a slightly more like a more kind of basic understanding, I guess, of harmony. So I think that was my first kind of the first point where I was like, oh, like maybe like, you know, maybe I could be a composer, like it is like this is suddenly opening things up, and then did music in sixth form, and really enjoyed focusing on composition there as well. But I really remember the idea of wanting to be a composer came from GCSE and A-level music, like came directly from doing it at school, whether kind of, you know, wanting to be in a band or etc. That was a bit more related to, you know, do it playing with mates or whatever. The idea of wanting to be a composer and a film composer came directly from
education.
From education and having some really, really good music teachers both in secondary school and at sixth form, which is really fortunate.
This is quite an interesting. I don't think we've talked in depth about this for years and years. To present almost a slight counter to what Aaron experienced, I think I was dissuaded from studying music by music education. Yeah, and that's partially the reason. I think I had a bit of pressure from my school on me as well to sort of do a conventionally vocational degree as well. That's kind of another reason to do engineering. But another reason is that I just didn't, at school, I just couldn't write essays, and I couldn't get interested in the sort of history of music and write. And I loved making music and practically sort of like got into composing mainly for sort of chamber groups. I was also playing a lot of violin. I was like leading the orchestra, and it was an amazing school because I also like had an amazing piano teachers. So it was really useful from that perspective. But I just thought I wouldn't want to spend 3 years like writing about music. And that was very much like the degrees that I was shown to and encouraged, rather than, you know, more practical music degrees. So it was the academic side. And then when I eventually like changed to music, you can kind of choose modules, and I would choose the ones that were practical. You know, the composition, like sort of production, orchestration, and then do the essays if I had to. But to be honest, then I got into writing essays, and I kind of got the fact that a history of music can be really, really interesting if you're interested in the music and you're interested in the history of it. But I was kind of awakened to that all, you know, a lot later on. But I do sometimes wonder if I kind of spent quite a lot of time on a deviated course because it was very academic. But even at uni, and I don't know if you found this, Aaron, you could sort of like do quite a lot of production and stuff, but in terms of composition with other players, there were quite few opportunities on the music course. There were some composition competitions, but there was only 2 or 3 of them, and everyone would apply. So if you won, then you would get your piece played by an orchestra. But it wasn't as though we all just, you know, had pieces played by orchestra. It was like one in sort of 10 chance that you might get that opportunity for a year, which wasn't really
I guess that's like preparing you for real life. That's just like the kind of reality of composing for players. It's
really kind of hard. Competitive.
It's hard to sort of get pieces played.
Well, and question for you: do you think you would have been able to achieve what you've achieved thus far and got where you are without formal education in music? For
me, definitely no. That I think that's where I learned a lot, and specifically the degree and Dave touched on this. I think we learned a lot from the degree itself, but I also think having like for us, because we were able to stay on and do the masters, having like 4 years where we were basically spending 4 years just writing
and thinking
about music and like completely enveloped in music, and all of our friends were studying music. To have that opportunity is like completely amazing. It's completely separate from the real world, and actually a lot of the course kind of sometimes like the course was very it was unpragmatic in terms of like a career level, and sometimes I think that's a negative thing, but sometimes I think it was actually great because we were just thinking about music, and I think the musical development of those 4 years is like was for me, but I think for both of us was like huge, and can't if I'd have gone into the real world without having that course and without having that musical development, I don't think I would have been in a position to kind of take advantage of the opportunities that I was fortunate enough to kind of stumble upon, or yeah.
Talk me through the series of events. So you finish your masters. by this point you haven't actually sort of done your first film score together, but can you talk me through the sort of series of events, the elements that led up to scoring Adolescence?
Yeah. So, oh, right. Okay. So, so we essentially both did a few projects together, like within the music courses, and we're in a band, and we're kind of best mates as well, like for the whole like sort of last 2 or 3 years of uni, hanging out like all the time, and just, you know, I guess listening to quite a lot of music, but also just like having loads of fun.
We used to go around Bristol and climb onto roofs of buildings. Completely illegally.
Okay, hold on. I don't know if we want to put that out there.
There was a huge tower on a park called Brandon Park, and they were scaffolding it, and there was a huge like 2-story high fence. And we broke into it once and climbed all the way up to the top of Brandon Hill Tower, and it was one of my favourite evenings of university. It was amazing. Sorry,
it's like looking back on those days, we just had absolutely no. Right. Like as like in your 30-year-olds now, and you're a dad, like there's no way we'd even do half the stuff that we used to do. Like honestly, we had a slightly wild streak, and did some things we probably shouldn't have, and we're very lucky to have survived with all our bones intact. Anyway, so yeah, we had all those experiences. Then we went on slightly different paths for maybe about 5 years, staying in touch the whole time. I sort of carried on that theatrical wave. So started a theatre company with some mates, went to the Edinburgh Fringe loads of times, started touring shows, started working for theatres, mainly as a sound designer, composer, and musical director, sometimes performer. And through that made a few contacts of people who are also making films and short films, and scored a couple, and then decided to like Aaron and I, there was one in particular that felt like it would be really exciting, and I thought, okay, Aaron, would you like to collaborate on this? We've spoken about this a lot, and that was a film in 2017 called Kin, which was directed by Helena Middleton. It was her directorial debut. She's a pretty amazing theatre director, and it starred Joseph Quinn, who then has gone on to like great things, and you know, got big on the Stranger Things scene, and then we had a wonderful experience collaborating on that, and then in 2019 we had another short sort of come our way through Philip Barantini, and it was his first short. No, actually that was 2018, and I scored that solo, and then Phil got back in touch a year later and said, listen, I've got this feature film, I'd love you guys to score it, and that was Villain. And it was like, okay, Aaron, we've got an opportunity to write music for a feature. Do you want to collaborate again? And it was like, let's do it. It was a tiny budget, and we spent more than half the budget on the studio and one player.
Right, okay.
For one day.
Yeah.
And
what was the instrument?
We only had bass clarinet. That was a huge conversation actually, and we realized we only had one. We decided to like try and spend the entire like sort of budget on a specialist instrument, and there was a clarinetist called Sarah Homer who'd just done a project on the Olivier stage at the National Theatre, where they built, it was for Macbeth actually in 2019, and they built all these tube instruments that she could plug a mouthpiece into, and it sounded incredible. But she's a kind of quite experimental bass clarinetist who knows everything there is to know about multiphonics and things. So we decided to sort of spend a day with her and just collect. We'd written a few lines, and then it was just like, all right, we're going to collect loads and loads of sounds and just close mic this bass clarinet, and then use that as the sort of pulsing heart of the score. So that was an absolutely amazing and very intense sort of late night compositional experience. We wrote the whole score in about 15 days. And from then on, it was like, okay, great, this is amazing. At least for me anyway, it was like, this is work that I think is of a better quality than anything I could sort of do on my own, and creating more of a sum of its parts. And there's a sort of, you know, Aaron and I, we have quite different musical brains and backgrounds, really. And we were coming at it and sort of bouncing off each other and like laddering. Like it felt like going up a ladder, and we've kind of used that as a collaborational sort of metaphor ever since. And and so when it came to like future work, it was like, okay, well, when we have a screen project come our way, let's do it together. And then it just sort of grew from there. And very fortunately, so did Philip Barantini's career. So that's kind of taking us to like sort of getting serious as a duo, which started happening in 2019. Before then, I missed out Aaron's years as like post uni, which was like, do you want to just say what you're up to?
So Dave's theatre company, Dave went to China for a few months to run a children's choir.
Yeah.
Which is very, very relevant actually to Adolescence, which I'm sure we'll touch upon. But I was working in a pub, and then I stood in to do the live electronics of a performance with this theatre company called Mary and Max. No, it wasn't called that. Sorry, it was called
Lorraine and Alan.
Look, Mary and Max is a completely different. Mary and Max is a really beautiful animated film. That was that, and then someone in the theatre company, when I was doing stuff on that show while Dave was in China, was like, "Oh, I've just seen this advert in the Guardian for charity called Finding Rhythms that runs music projects in prisons, and they're looking for a music engineer." And I was like, "Oh, that sounds cool." So I looked at it, and it was and I'd missed a deadline, but I applied anyway. And anyway, I started working with this charity called Finding Rhythms, who run music projects in prisons, and another one of the facilitators there, a guy called Will Worsley, had a company called Coda. At the time, they were called Coda Cola, but they've since changed the name to Coda to Cola. Coda to Coda. So they were like a sound design and music composition studio, who at the time did a lot of like kind of online content and stuff like that. But they just scored a contract to do the sound, so all the voice recording, sound design, and music composition for a 52-part CBBC series called Messi Goes to Okido, and it was just two of them, and they were like, "Whoa, we need another person now." So I very fortunately, through meeting Will doing the prison work, kind of started working at Coda to Coda, and then from there, I guess learned a lot of like studio chops and got experience of writing music and doing sound design to screen, and that was the studio that we hired when we did our score to Villain. They very kindly gave us like a
unbelievably cheap,
it was like £40 a day or something like that, just a really nice rate, which was really valuable because neither of us really had kind of suitable studios at the time.
No. Just to add, the Finding Rhythms is an absolutely amazing charity. Aaron's role going into that was as the engineer, and you go in and do 6-day sessions, usually spread out over 6 weeks, with prisoners in like the prison chapel or wherever is like, with the best space within the prison walls, and for each of those, the prisoners would get those 6 days to create music of different genres to go towards an album. That would also be a BTEC for them. So there was something in it for them in terms of a qualification. Anyway, Aaron in those days probably produced 20 full albums of eclectic music written by prisoners. But I can't imagine a more intense like crucible to learn how to use, how to be a producer and how to sort of collaborate with lots of different energies, and one thing that happened after Aaron, because we were both using Logic at uni, and in those years afterwards, one thing that happened is that the Finding Rhythms specifically used Ableton because of its like ability to jam and create like loops on the fly and things like that. And after like one of these prison sessions, you probably did that for like 3 or 4 years, didn't you? And yeah, huge amount of amazing work. Yeah, they've got a Bandcamp, by the way. Really worth jumping into that.
I'll put a link to it in the show notes.
Yeah. Aaron was on the phone. I really remember Aaron ringing me up and being like, Dave, you just got to change to Ableton straight away. It's amazing. Like we've been wasting our times. So I was like, oh my goodness. And then there was a potential for me getting involved in finding rhythm. So I really got into Ableton. Tried to start learning.
To HMP Swinfen Hall,
and I shadowed Aaron at 2 or 3 prisons, which is an absolute eye opener for me. And there's a couple of stories there. We won't have time. But it was amazing, and it was so inspiring as well. And that worked. I never got involved in a deep way with the prison project, but it was a really great experience for me. But then when it came to doing our short film, it was like, great, should we collaborate using Ableton? So we started scoring using Ableton, and we're still doing it today. Wow. So it's a slightly unusual sort of workflow, but we find it like a very collaborative platform and an instrument in itself in some ways.
In what way? In what way is it more so than something like Logic?
I mean, it's quite interesting because I guess we're going to be comparing it now to the Logic of 10, 12 years ago. So things are probably very different now. But at the time, and maybe still now, Logic was very much set up in to emulate how like a desk or whatever is set up. So you've got your time left to right, and then you've got your channels. Well, Ableton, just with the, I don't even know what they call it, the session view. No, not the session view, the clip view.
Yeah.
So but it just allows you 2 people in a room, kind of improvise something, record it, grab it, quickly edit it, loop it. So it just created a more fluid form of composing with 2 people, and I think the other thing that Ableton did better, and maybe it still does. So kind of our work is like definitely has a lot of classical elements, but it also has sort of electronic elements. But those elements are always very much based on sounds that we record. So we're never really using, or very rarely using, MIDI, for example. But we'll be more like recording something on the piano and then stretching it or something like that. And at the time, I don't know if this is still the case, Ableton was just so much better at working with audio. So you could, at the time, if you wanted to reverse a bit of audio in Logic, it would take like 5 seconds or 10 seconds. Or if you wanted to slow it down or speed it up or anything like that, which is a big part of our workflow, creating textures by recording some cello or piano and then time stretching it, granulate, but whatever it is, a lot of it is working with audio
in a creative way.
That's
very fast and doesn't take much time, because it's really important as part of the experimental phase to be able to just like have an idea, see if it works, and then go back. The other thing is like, well, two small things. I just love the Ableton in-house plugins and how they're arranged in the row. And from my perspective, I was very much catching up with Aaron as a producer from like in the first few projects we did together. I just loved being able to see everything happen and the chain of plugins. I think it's really like awesome, and it's not putting the way Ableton does it. It's not putting any polish or paint on it. It's just, this is the thing, and I find that really good. It's more like a sort of lab. It feels like a lab or something. And then the other thing is automation. You can automate absolutely any parameter incredibly quickly, which can be really,
and modulate any parameter off each other.
Oh yeah, and then use that. Yeah, exactly. It's just like, yeah. Anyway, there's loads of other things as well. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, great. All right, so we're not
sort of paid by Ableton. Although we would be interested in that conversation.
Yeah. If anyone from Ableton is listening to
once this goes live, you're going to be on their books. So
yeah,
cool. Okay, so we got up to scoring Villain with Philip Berentini, which I suppose let's segue nicely into going under the skin and have a chat about Adolescence. Under the Skin. So obviously you've worked with Philip previously. You guys know each other. He knows what you do. Talk about when that came through. The brief came in. What was the brief, and what was the starting point?
Yeah, so we heard about the project long before we knew whether there was going to be a role for music on it. So to sort of take a step back about 3 or 4 years, we'd been involved in the one-shot film Boiling Point, which is Phil's actually second one-shot kind of venture, because he'd done the short film of Boiling Point initially, and at the time that Boiling Point was made, he brought us on for, I think, about a week, just to really roughly create some sort of rough score to see if there was a role for score within the single shot format. And in that instance, it felt like score would pierce the kind of the realism of the show. But we did end up kind of creating a less conventional score, which was the diegetic music played through the restaurant speakers. But the reason that I say that is that when Adolescence first came through, we heard about it, and we heard about the plot and the scale of it, and thought, oh my god, like, this sounds unbelievable. We really want to get involved, touch all the wood, and cross all the fingers that music might work, because we know from experience that might not be the case, because there's a specific there's a specific immediacy that comes with the realism of one shot, and like, your role as a composer is you want to enhance, but you really don't want to pierce anything. So yeah, we didn't know if there was going to be music, but then it gradually became apparent that there would be a role for music, and whether that was something just minimal at times to kind of aid transitions, or the you know what, Dave, do you want to take over?
Yeah, so we weren't sure if there was going to be a role for music, and then Phil, towards the end, when they started watching back the episodes that they had already completed, because it was very sort of segmented, the filming process. They had 3 weeks on each episode, so it was sort of very linear, as it were. They were watching a couple of them back, and they realised, yeah, there is going to be a role for music here. It's probably going to be quite minimal. And then we got into meetings with Phil and the producer, Joe Johnson, and we started sort of discussing other places where there might be music, and it just kind of grew and grew. It never got, it's not a heavily scored drama at all, but there are quite a few places where music is doing quite a lot of the work in keeping up the intensity through the episodes, particularly in episodes 1 and 2, I would say, and just keeping the momentum a little bit. So it grew, and it was about finding the language of what that music was going to be, and the role of it, because it didn't seem like there was a real template we could use. They hadn't found any temp music that really worked to stick on it. So it was really, it was quite a tough challenge, and to be honest, it took us a long time to get the musical language. We threw a lot at it, and it got to the stage where it was becoming a bit of a struggle, and we were having to sort of start from scratch quite a few times. And Phil's brilliant in that regard. He's leading us very gently, but it's hard to describe, but he is the sort of he's the king of the universe of the creative project. Every single creative department is deferring to him, and very gently he just urges you towards what he needs, and you'll be wedded to something that you've just spent 3 or 4 days on, really going into detail on something, and he'll go, yeah, it's just not quite working for me, and while Phil never feels like he has the language to speak in depth about the mechanics of the music, and most directors that we've worked with don't have that, but he speaks in more emotional terms about what he needs it to offer, and you just have to sort of really try and listen to that, and yeah, I guess really feel your way through the drama. And Adolescence was one that you had to feel, and because it's just so affecting to watch. Yeah,
and it's interesting you touched on that, the universal language of emotion, because obviously within the world of music and music tech, there's lots of specific nerdery and jargon, which, you guys would understand as a director. Similarly, within the world of visuals, there's probably stuff, but the one place that you can converge with a director or anybody who's got a brief is like emotion. Is like, what is the emotion that you're trying to elicit here? Because that's something that everybody can buy into, and then you guys go off and sort of work out, okay, how do we elicit that emotion? And to your point as well, Aaron, but without overwhelming the visuals, because it's that one take thing, and it has an energy all of its own, and you don't want to interrupt that. You want to just sort of gently support it. But yeah, I mean, that's seems to me sort of music is about. It's about that emotion, isn't it? Eliciting a specific emotion.
Yeah, the I feel like the most basic, like, or not the most basic, the most sort of fundamental ways of talking about music or creative process can be the most sort of eye-opening ones. We for a project we're currently actually thinking about a romantic language for a project that we're currently working on, and it was really interesting taking a step back and being like, okay, what emotionally does a romantic language like what is romance? Because normally when you think about so romance is really happy, but quite often there's like a small backbone, a small kind of like pervading feeling of like melancholy in romance. So there's and then later on, as you're then the melancholy can be some minor harmony and but kind of really stripping things back to kind of like what does romance mean, or like what does tension mean? They're in like really basic emotional language or really fundamental emotional language is a really interesting exercise.
So I interviewed Jed Kurtzel and Christabel Tapia-Devere, and joked with them is that what, and the same with you guys, is what you're doing is you're just sort of trying to make people feel a bit uncomfortable.
Really, yeah, that's the job.
Because obviously, think about Boiling Point and you think about Adolescence. It's tension. You're sort of making people feel uncomfortable. That's a very, very different to Romance, is it?
Yeah, it's completely different, and that's the joy of the job. I think Aaron and I love getting into the creative period at the beginning where we're finding a sound world for a project and trying to make a sound that really fits with the project and hopefully feels very different from the other work that we've done. I think we've talked about this a lot, but we're the kind of we like to go on a bit of a journey and explore with the project. So yeah, with a lot of the work for the last 3 or 4 years has been sort of psychological drama, social realism, sometimes getting into the world of psychological thrillers with like Malpractice and things. Each one of them had completely different sound worlds, but you're trying to do similar things in terms of propel the drama, create tension. And now we're doing something completely different at times. I mean, there's still a lot of tension and chase and thriller, but yeah, romantic music is something that we haven't necessarily had the chance to write, and it's an absolute treat to sort of go into that, and it's a lovely contrast.
And do you have to lean into harmony more and maybe traditional scoring than sound design? Because everything that's come before, it feels like there's a real synth element, there's sonic textures, there's a lot of sound design. Whereas with this Romance, are you going more down the route of sort of harmonic composition?
Yeah, one thing that's been really nice on this project that I'm not sure we're allowed to say that we're working on at the moment is it's been really fun starting the compositional process of cues with on the piano with so thinking about it harmonically and melodically with as opposed to thinking about it sonically. There's something like variation is like one of the joys of life. So I'm sure if we'd spent the last 10 years doing scores which were all pen to paper, we'd then be like, oh my god, I just want to experiment sonically. But it's really wonderful kind of having the opportunity to be working on a score now where kind of the way that you orchestrate it, the sounds that you use kind of won't necessarily change the fundamental impact of each cue that you're writing. While with something like Adolescence, the sounds that we use and the instruments that we chose to use and the kind of just the kind of the way they were produced, etc., are are intrinsically important. Like the cues would exist in a completely different sphere if the sounds were changed, where the sound is as important. And
that's why there's
the melodic kind of harmonic content. Well, this is like a completely opposite. This is a contrasting way of doing it, which is really fun.
And how does it? I'm really interested in this sort of element of collaboration as well, because you are the second sort of composer duo. I interviewed Vanba a couple of weeks ago. Tim Morris and Jessica Jones. They're Bristolian as well. So it's like,
nice.
Bristol seems to be sort of dominating the TV music scene at the moment. But they're a couple, and they work together in Bristol. They did One Day with Anne Nicotine.
Oh, yeah.
And then they've, what was it, Tinder Swindler and Jimmy Savile, A Horror Story. But they work together, and obviously you guys are working together. And in my mind, I kind of always assumed that maybe one person would take the lead on certain elements and the other person would sort of complement. But with those guys, it's not the case. And it seems that maybe with you guys, it's not either. You're both sort of doing the music tech, the sound design, the synthy stuff. You're both doing the instrumental stuff. What is the dynamic, and what are the benefits of it?
I think we do have different skills, but the main those main skill sets have, I guess, in a Venn diagram over the last years, they've just been overlapping, and we've hopefully just learned and shared a lot with each other. And then it all sort of starts with a conversation and just a few reference points of things that we like, and then we'll just start sort of jamming. We did work in the same studio for about 2 years together, but now we're living in different cities. We've got our own spaces, but we spend loads of time on the phone to each other, and sometimes we'll be just visiting each other and spending a couple of days. Like Aaron's in the studio with me now in London, we're completely sort of 50-50 in the process. We'll come up with a few key little nuggets of ideas and throw stuff at each other. And so for Adolescence, it was as I said earlier, it was a process that didn't really have any template and blueprint, and we were sort of struggling. So we'd have a few sort of key sounds. We ended up figuring out that we might be able to use a voice, a young female voice, an adolescent voice in the score. So at one point we were like, why don't we just try and experiment with other things that use breath? So we started recording an old Victorian pump organ that Aaron found online, and sort of transported it with quite some inconvenience to a studio in Stroud.
Yeah,
Aaron sort of bought me. We sometimes buy each other slightly odd instruments for birthday presents, which is a little bit of a sort of vocational, like nerdy birthday present. But I think we quite both like having these things about.
And they always end up in scores.
And nearly every single one has ended up in score. There's a bass recorder back there, which you can sort of sing through and play at the same time and get these standing waves, which when pitched around a little bit, end up being very delicious, airy drones. So that ended up on Adolescence.
A lot of the sort of the bass in Adolescence was like a blend between Dave's bass recorder. It's not multiphonics because he's humming and singing the same note, but it's kind of
slightly out of tune.
It's creating that kind of interference, but that pitched down like 2 octaves, and then this old pump organ which has a delicious. It has a delicious.
Just say it, mate. It's
lower register.
But it's quite dusty and
delicious woody overtones.
But we kind of like. We'll send each other a few little nuggets, and then, on Ableton, we'll sort of like remix and repurpose what the other one has done, send it back, and just start sort of going back and forth.
And it just evolves over time.
Yeah, and sometimes, one of us will kind of, slightly tear apart or reimagine the thing that the other person has written, and it might take it on a different life. And that idea might split into 2, or it might just take on a different direction. But the whole thing is based, I think it's based around trust, and it's based around the fact that you need to at some point let go of the music to let the other one let it grow, and then accept it back sort of freely with open arms, and then keep on growing. And we have this metaphor of the ladder that we're always going up a ladder and kind of taking it up a rung, to sort of like build what that thing is. And nearly all of our favourite cues and bits of music that we've written are things that we can't really remember where it started because it got so convoluted in the process, and might have borrowed bits from other things that they end up being sort of separate entities to either of us. They're like in a third sort of place, and we're able to appreciate it from the outside without feeling that sort of ownership. Oh, that's me. It's a bit of me, and that I think is quite nice.
That's the most direct way. As in like where we're. But I would say that there's also like a wider way, which is kind of, Dave touched on this. It's like the conversations, and it's the actual developing of a framework for the musical language in the first place. Because basically, when you're working on a project, the first, and this is probably different for everyone, but like for me, the first like 2 or 3 months are like incredibly stressful and scary, and you question your ability to play a triad on the piano ever again, because you have no framework, and then we mold the musical language, and then that provides a framework which then informs all of the musical decisions. And I think that's a massive, and that happens through directly composing. At the beginning, there's this process of like throwing shit at the wall. So we'll just be writing like a piece a day, 2 pieces a day, throwing them to each other, talking about them, and through that process, we kind of funnel and create the framework for musical language. And it's also through, like, I think we've joked before in interviews, but it's true. Like, we probably spend like 3 hours a day on the phone, like a long time on the phone, where we're like talking about music talking about the music that we're writing for a project, talking about music that we think about for a project, talking about non-musical but artistic things, and like all of that functions to create a musical framework, like essentially,
and then with the
architecture
as well.
Of the language, and with the director as well, which then informs the notes that we put onto paper, or the recordings that we make.
So do you kind of create a palette of sounds which is for that musical world, and then once that's established, then it makes the sort of cue writing thereafter a bit easier because you know what the sort of starting point is or what the palette is.
Yeah, because the creation of that palette is almost, even though that palette itself isn't a piece of music, it's probably is created through the creation of multiple pieces of music, but the development of that palette, and it's a sound palette, but it's also like a harmonic language and sort of like rhythmic motifs and stuff like that.
Yeah, and that
is kind of the compositional process. Is as much of the compositional process as the composing of cues.
And that palette will be informed totally by the project. So for Adolescence, it started off being more of a sound palette. It's like, what are the sounds that are going to work with these images? Whereas with the project that we're on now, it's probably more of a harmonic and melodic palette. It will have a few key motifs and ideas, but it completely, that's the thing that marries to the image.
Yeah.
Which is so important, yeah.
And do you guys? I mean, it sounds like with collaboration, it's one of those where you sort of have to leave your ego at the door because you're going to be bouncing back. And I love the ladder analogy as well, as you're sending something back, and it's like, is this taking it up a rung on the ladder? Equally, if you feel you get something back, you feel it's gone down a rung on the ladder, do you have the freedom to say, no, I think what you've done there's shit?
Yeah, I think so. I think we've learned to do that like quite diplomatically.
Yeah,
but it's less of a thing of, I don't think that you've taken it. It's less of a thing of like, you've taken this down the ladder. It's more of a thing of like, okay, maybe you've got a different idea for where this cue could go than I do. So then it can become two separate avenues, and then we'll sort of like maybe generally like leave it for a while.
Yeah,
and then when it comes back to putting it to picture. But I've got to say, in general, it happens incredibly rarely. And one of the things, and it's almost a superpower of being a collaborative duo, okay, I will say, is the objectivity that you get especially from working on a cue for maybe half a day, coming up with the detail. It might be 2 minutes, it might be 1 minute, it might be 3 minutes long, but you've really tried to sort of like hit key points within the flow of the scene, say. but you get so wedded and you're so in the world of it, you've lost objectivity. And that happens in nearly every creative discipline, particularly composition. But that's so good. Then you hand it over to Aaron at the other end of the phone. You're like, listen, I've just, give this a watch when you get a minute. He gets that one chance to see it as the audience member that you never do as an individual composer ever again. And and so we then are able to have a discussion. He's like, that's great. You've completely missed the bit where he turns his head and says this line to her. And I'm like, oh yeah, fuck. Like, what, and then from that point, there's like, oh, there's actually a bass note that can come in there, or you want to have the second inversion of that chord because that makes it feel, a bit weightless, and then you can sort of like have this cadence here, or what about a little tremolo line, whatever it is. It's that objectivity that is the sort of like the sweet moment of the collaboration, and then that's where I think we then hopefully build something that we're both happy with, and then the director sees it for the first time and they've got that sort of level of detail that hopefully, I don't know.
I think there's a really interesting thing that sort of shows this, which is like sometimes one of us will show an idea to another to the other one, and we will have complete opposite ideas of where the downbeat is, or what the key center is. Like sometimes that I'll be like, oh, it's in C major, and Dave will be like, oh no, it's like F Phrygian. It's Phrygian mode with the raised foot. Yeah, it's F Phrygian mode, and we're like, no, the center is here, or like, no, the downbeat is here. And so it's like really, really simple things, and it's really interesting because it gives things different perspectives, but yeah, it's an interesting showing of how like having two minds can like on a really basic level hear a piece in very different ways, which is exciting.
Yeah, it makes sense. I mean, that's basically what Tim and Jess alluded to with Vanda. They were saying that that perspective thing is really invaluable. And even here, like when I moved into this studio, there's two friends in the adjacent studio, just to bring someone in with a fresh pair of ears and go, can I play this? And they'll just hear something that you've been sat there for hours, you can't hear it anymore. And they'll hear something, you go, what if you mute that? And it's like, oh God, yeah, there you go, that smells better. But it's that perspective. But also, yeah, just I suppose you buoy each other as well in terms of just keeping it fresh and exciting, because the other person comes up with something you're like, oh yeah, great, and it's about that to and fro, and you end up taking it down, as you say, like avenues that maybe you might not have done if you were working on your own, and then ultimately, hopefully, the end product is vastly improved than it would be if you were just sort of sat in a room for hours at a time without that objectivity, without that fresh perspective, and without those pooling of ideas. Getting a taste. We sort of touched on it briefly in terms of Aphex Twin. Obviously, for you, Aaron, was a seminal moment in your creative development. Are there other bands or albums or tracks that you remember hearing which you think had a sort of profound impact on your creativity?
Yeah, I think we've got a few. We love Christopher Tapia de Veer, like everything he touches. We were obsessed with the Utopia soundtrack as students, and the sort of humour and darkness at the same time of it, and the sort of quirkiness and lots of manipulation of audio as well. We got into that. He's clearly using quite a lot of sampling and voice.
With that Utopia score, like I think it still sounds completely fresh today, but there were maybe more scores that are out now that have been influenced by it, but at the time when that came out, it sounded like nothing else. Like had never ever heard a score that sounded anything like the Utopia soundtrack. From like the what he was doing with voices, kind of what he was doing with kind of samplers and just but also just emotionally, the kind of like dark, like carnival-y, like quirky, like nightmarishness of it was just fucking amazing.
We love like everything that Mika Levy does as well. We just like, there's something about their choices. It's so bold, and I think one of my favourite scores that they've done, and films actually, is Monos, which is set in the Colombian sort of high sort of rainforests, and it's like these like this child guerrilla warfare groups. It's just absolutely stunning as a film, and I think it did really well at Cannes. I think it won a prize at Cannes, but didn't seem to make the splash it deserved over here. But the score is only, it's not a long soundtrack. But it's one of those things where it just, a bit like all the work that Cristobal Tapia de Villa does. It gives you a lens through which to see the drama that only that composer could have done. Because if you had like sort of Muzak or something a bit twee for White Lotus, for example, you just wouldn't be getting the humour of it. And similarly to Mika Levy's scores with Monos, it just takes it to a surreal, beautiful place. I think that they're someone that we just go and see the film because they've scored it.
Yeah. And I mean, have you always listened to film scores? Was that something you did as a kid?
I think I got pretty into film scores as a teenager, but not in a sort of like really direct way. I was listening. I was growing up in quite a sort of classical environment with a bit of like rock and stuff thrown in. I think but for the last sort of 10 years or so, I listened to quite a few, and have a few favourites and go and see the films. Just almost like do it that way round.
For me, I think the first time that I saw that I really got into film scores was actually Jan Tierson's score Family, which was when I was about 16 or so, and it's so and I got absolutely obsessed with that film score to the extent that it made me pick up the accordion.
Did you start playing accordion
because of Family?
Late?
Yeah,
no way.
yeah. I bought my first accordion in upper sixth, no, lower sixth,
Really?
sixth for upper sixth. Yeah, but I was just obsessed with it, and I played it all the time.
Yeah. When we were in a band, Aaron was on accordion, I was on fiddle. It was like a folk band, by the way. But Aaron's a wonderful accordion player.
Well, that was going to be my next question. Actually, was what when you were doing band stuff, what were your influences there?
Well, we were actually sort of part of a band project that was led by other people. We just were enjoyed playing and enjoyed the vibe of it.
It was kind of folk, so it was like Mumford and Sons influence, but also a little bit Arcade Fire-ish. Mm-hmm. But it was a lot of fun. It was led by a guy called Will Stokes, who is in a band now called Voca Gentle, who is, I think, an incredible musician and an incredibly creative person. But it was we played together in that band for 3 years.
Yeah,
toured, did a lot of gigs. It was great.
And were you during that time? Would you have been listening to a lot of folk music?
More classic for me, more classical and electronic music.
It started a bit of a love affair for me. It maybe happened quite slowly, but now I listen to quite a lot of folk, and I play a little bit of folk as well on fiddle. I've just bought an Irish bouzouki, which is
nice.
My kind of like crush at the moment. It sits in the corner of my studio and just lures me over to it.
Are you going to be able to shoehorn that into the romance score?
Absolutely. Yeah. It's going in. It's absolutely going in. Yeah.
There's something quite romantic and alluring about an Irish bouzouki.
Yeah, Captain Corelli's mandolin, sort of like yeah.
But yeah, there's a really interesting sort of like folk scene going on in the UK at the moment, sort of almost like revivalist shovel dance collective are just absolutely wonderful. And yeah, we kind of like know a few of those guys just completely randomly and go and support them and see them, and it's just wonderful music. But that's it's slightly different, and I think what I love about that kind of music is the level at which they're going into deep history and sort of digging out old songs from like I don't know, libraries and things, and rooting it to sort of issues around folk and sort of working class identity. I think it's really exciting.
Yeah, and the Unthanks sort of do a lot of that. They sort of take these old like Northumbrian folk tunes, and Nix as well. I interviewed Sian O'Gorman of Nix, and she loves sort of taking, they're sort of vocal collaborative, and they love taking old folk tunes and then rearranging for voice. The Renaissance is happening. All right, guys. Well, I'm conscious of time, so we've just about got time to wrap up with the very important quick fire questions.
All right, go on.
Dave, firstly to you, what's your favourite biscuit?
Ginger nuts.
Chocolate hobnob.
Ginger nuts and chocolate hobnob. Good.
Yeah.
Both very solid sound choices. Are we Dunkin' or not?
Hell yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
You got it with the ginger nuts.
Oh, Aaron's not sure.
Yeah, it depends on the beverage. They're probably not.
If it's
not,
a beer.
not with a hobnob. Yeah, they're definitely not. Minestrone soup. Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
No. With a chocolate hobnob, I'm not dunking.
No.
It'll fall off.
Yeah, I wouldn't. I'm with you, mate. I'm not a dunker. Don't want to ruin my brew.
Yeah.
What do you do to let off steam?
I play quite a lot of ultimate frisbee.
Oh, cool. No, I'm not being sarcastic.
You weren't expecting that, were you?
No, I wasn't. It's something I was looking at last summer. I was looking at they do it in Finsbury Park in London, and I was like, I wondered about getting involved in something like that.
Didn't ask where you were. You north?
Yeah, Finsbury Park.
There's a couple of good groups. There's one in Hackney. I don't know if there's one. There must be one in Finsbury Park too. But there's one on Peckham Rye, which is just so. It's not official or organised at all, but it's just a group of people who play, and it's just wonderful. Yeah.
No, it's, I always love a bit of frisbee. How about you, Aaron?
I rollerblade.
Oh, of course. Because this is your post SAS career move.
Yeah, exactly. I'm still sort of waiting for 35 years young. I'm still waiting for someone from the brand Them Skates to just see me rollerblading and going, I can't believe we've never sponsored you before.
Yeah, it's only a matter of time.
Yeah, still waiting for that sponsorship.
And are we talking you're going down the skate park and doing some like crazy?
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. But bowls and stuff like that.
He's actually quite good.
Yeah.
And I it pains me to say he's impressively good.
But that's very kind. But as you get older, and also as you sort of like begin to take on projects. So we had this busy period last year when we were working on Adolescence, and we knew Adolescence was going to be huge, and we couldn't fuck it up. And I was like, should I? It's quite a big life choice. It's like, should I skate? It's like, because what if I break my arm?
Which he's done a couple of times.
Yeah, which I've done a couple of times, and it's like, do you do what makes you happy, but then do you take on risk? No. Yeah. Anyway, so it's
I have the same question with frisbee. The way I play it, it really
it's extreme,
raises
in
it's
ultimately extreme. What's a little known fact about you?
I play quite a lot of ultimate frisbee. No.
And Aaron, you skated.
Yeah. I rollerblade.
That's not little known, is it? Well, I suppose to the masses.
Okay, I've gone. The village that I grew up in had the world's first community college. Boom.
Get out.
Yeah,
in
crazy.
Sawston?
Sawston Village College. First ever, world's first community college where anyone in the village could go and use like the library or facilities. And I got so excited saying that David's just pointed out that bit of the interview is going to be clipped to shreds.
It's okay. We'll find a way in post to get it. There's at least I'll just overdub it if I have to. It's going in.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Nice. What scares you?
I'm going to go with death. Death scares me. No. I don't know.
Tariffs on film.
Yeah.
Tariffs on films.
Or
sort of like tariffs on any cultural, any sort of like, locking down of free speech whatsoever, any sort of like cultural barriers, anything like that. But tariffs on films, sort of hitting an industry that is already, sort of struggling, especially like cinema and live cinema, which has already been sort of fighting a battle for many years against streamers. If the tariffs are affecting that, then I just think that's unbelievably bad.
And then, so finally, what piece of advice would you give to your younger selves?
Can I go with a really cheesy one on this?
Yeah. Please do.
Find a really good collaborator and like work at the relationship and the collaboration. There's so many reasons it's great, from just the day-to-day phone call, but also can you proofread this email that I've been struggling with, from the little superpowers that we talked about in terms of actual creativity. I would say be willing to collaborate.
I think that is
nice.
I don't think it's cheesy. I think it's brilliant, because at the beginning of this year, so every year I do kind of like a retrospective of the year before and look ahead to the year ahead. And I was looking back at last year and I was thinking, like, okay, what were my favourite projects of last year? And they were all ones when I collaborated with someone. So I said to myself, okay, this year I want to do more collaboration. But I think it's great. And I on a weekly basis, every Thursday morning, I have a call with a mate from uni, and we do sort of like a weekly check-in of 2 week wins and 2 challenges from the week, where we sort of discuss them. We basically provide a sounding board for each other to sort of look at what was working, what didn't, and it's been absolutely invaluable. So yeah,
that is awesome.
That's
really
those
cool.
sorts of things, mastermind groups and things like that. Anything collaborative, particularly in a world where we're becoming increasingly isolated because we can work from home. We don't even have to. We can do this interview. We're not even in the same room. So yeah, I think anything collaborative is sound advice, Dave. What about you, Aaron?
I would echo what Dave said about collaboration, but he's already said that, so I'm not going to say that. I'm going to say that this is actually something, again, that you touched upon when talking about like revelations in composing, and like the probably of anything creative, but obviously I'm a composer, so I'll go with that. That sort of success as an artist, not in terms of career, probably also in terms of career, but just sort of how successful you feel at creating the thing that you create is directly proportionate to the amount of time that you put into doing it. Nothing beats, in terms of getting where you want to be with something creatively, nothing beats the amount of time that you spend doing it. Yeah,
honing your craft. And it circles back nicely to, as you say, what Dave was saying at the beginning about that realization that you just got to dedicate yourself to the craft and just do it, and that's the only way to improve. So that's a nice sentiment to end the show on. Guys, thanks so much for taking time to chat. It's been hilarious and fascinating in equal measure. Socials, where do people find you?
Best place is probably Instagram. We've got a joint Instagram account. It's like Aaron _and _David, I think.
Yeah,
I think
so.
I'll link to it in the show notes.
Nice. That's probably best to hear about what we've been up to, which is
nice. Awesome. All right, guys. Thanks very much for chatting.
We got a Spotify as well, so check that out.
Spotify, yeah.
Yeah, we've got some. We got the Adolescence soundtrack is out.
Boiling Point's on there as well.
Boiling Point's on there online, and a few other.
Feeling Vanguard. We've got quite a lot on there now. We've got about 6 or 7 OSTs, I think.
Yeah.
Guys, thanks so much.
Thanks so much, Jim. It's really, really thank you. It's been brilliant.
Nice to meet you, dude.
Thank you very much for listening. If you've enjoyed this episode, and given that you've listened this far, I feel you might have, then I would be honoured and incredibly grateful if you could take a moment to subscribe, rate and review on your podcast platform of choice. By subscribing, you'll automatically be notified each time a new episode drops, and by rating the show, you tell the artificial intelligence that will soon be running the world that this podcast is worth listening to. I certainly get a lot of insights and value from these conversations, and I genuinely hope you do too. If you'd like to get in touch with the show, then you can email me, podcast@larpmusic.com. Larpmusic.com is my digital abode, and the home of the podcast is larpmusic.com/Sync Music Matters Podcast. And Sync Music Matters Podcast is hyphenated. Thanks again for listening, and until next time.